This is my conversation with Mitchell White. We talk about his early childhood, and Mitchell opens up about the challenges and limitations he has faced as a child, about his relationship with his parents, and what therapy has done for him. And later on in the episode, we also delve into the world of nutrition. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the Jeffrey Vallejo podcast, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Leaving a comment or a positive review is also a great way to help out. And I do want to mention, I do greatly enjoy going through the comments and interacting with them, so feel free to share your thoughts. But for now, here's my conversation with Mitchell White. So, brain health is a very complex topic, and food always seems to come forward almost instantly the moment we talk about brain health. So, before we dive into the details of nutrition and brain health, could you start by giving a small introduction of who you are, what prompted you to study nutrition and brain health, and then maybe share your perspective on the relationship between food, the food that we consume, and the health of our brains?
Sure, Jeffrey. Let's see. I would say I start with from the age of 6 to 16 and a half, roughly, I had a feeding tube. And basically, my body had a form of malnutrition and some form of nutrients deficiency as well, where, my body just wouldn't absorb a lot of the nutrients from most foods that I would eat. Now you combine that with the high metabolism of a kid all the way throughout his teenage years, then it's not a good mix.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts from there, and how it really hit me how important it is to pretty much take care of your body and not accept the hand, I guess, that you're dealt, despite kind of what the doctors tell you. Um, so between eventually my body being healthy enough to be rid of the feeding tube, and we can go more into that story too if you want. Just feel free to ask later on.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, as my body got healthy enough where I didn't need to rely on the feeding tube, so to speak, because I had this formula called Peptamin Junior, and it was pumped into my body. I had nightly feedings almost every single night. Uh, and there's specific enzymes, and I don't know the specifics of it, but from what I understand from my mom telling me about what the doctor says, there's specific enzymes to help my body retain nutrition from stuff that I eat, as well as the formula itself being packed full of nutrition. And so it just started from there, Jeff, really. And, it delves into my journey of experimenting with therapy, and all of this combined with all of this just transferring over to my interest in personal self-development and just how we can just continue improving our lives despite, the cards that we've been given.
And about that card that you've been given, that feeding tube, was that a reaction to some kind of underlying condition, or did something trigger that? How did that come about?
I would say something mu- it, something must have triggered it. As far as I know, my mother tells me that the doctor said it might have been a form of, it's called Schwachman's diamond syndrome. And it's a very, very, very rare condition, which, most people out there haven't heard of it, and I couldn't spell it for you, unfortunately, if you asked. But, it's a rare form of nutrients deficiency, similar or in specific to, what I mentioned before about it just my body wouldn't retain any of the nutrients or hardly any of the nutrients, and I was fairly skinny throughout
Hmm.
grade school and high school. And then, so yeah, that's pretty much how it seems to be linked.
Is it something hereditary? So something that your parents or your grandparents had?
No, and that's the one of the wildest things, Jeff. It's not. I'm the only one in
Hmm.
my family that's kind of had any sort of weak immune system and nutrients problem like this.
Right. Any research done on what caused it? Is it something like from early childhood, like regarding a disease or sickness that you encountered in the wild, or something else? Is there anything known about what caused it?
I would say the only thing from what I understand, and this kind of helps ties into the whole path of understanding nutrition, Jeff, is
Hmm.
the standard American diet can do wild, crazy things to anybody at any age. So I'm under the impression that my exposure to ultra processed foods is directly correlated to my turnout of my body not really responding the way it should have been growing up.
Hmm. And this is food. So the standard American diet food, you believe that your ingestion has triggered it, not necessarily that of your parents, for example. Or.
I would say that's the only thing I can go off of,
Hmm.
really, other than the fact that with what I know, it's a rare condition. Schwashman's assuming it's true.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Okay. And okay, so were there any other things aside from the feeding tube? Because that means, I believe, that they connect some kind of fluid that contains all the nutrients that you need to directly give that to you in the hopes that you absorb that and therefore get healthy again. So you also said, like, at some point you grew out of it. You had this condition active between 6 and 16, and then you grew out of that. So what was the process for you of growing out of it to get to yeah, towards regular health again, I suppose?
oh, I'm glad you asked, Jeff. Really, it was as an observation of my own, really. Let's see. I just started exercising more regularly,
Mm-hmm.
doing calisthenics in the basement when I was living with my mom, and I noticed my body's physique changed from actually exercising more.
Mm-hmm.
And logically, it clicked to me in the sense of, well, if my body can adjust and adapt through, this kind of pressure and improve, I had this hunch that, maybe it kind of caught up, so to speak, as far as my immune system and everything else. Maybe at this point it was just a teenager having a high metabolism. And
Mm-hmm.
so I went to my mom about it and I asked her and I said, "Hey, you," I forget exactly how I said it, but I asked her along the lines of, "Hey, do you think I really need this thing anymore? Because, I'm exercising and I'm putting on muscle weight, which is a huge sign for
Mm-hmm.
me." And we both kind of came to the agreement and conclusion that maybe I don't need it anymore. And sure enough, we just made some appointments to see the doctors at Boston Children's Hospital. And yeah, here we are. Now I have a scar on my stomach.
Mm-hmm. Right. Um, the feeding tube was being used between 6 and 16. But it wasn't, you can't necessarily say, okay, you don't need it anymore, or you do. You had the feeling that you didn't need it anymore, because you made the conclusion like, okay, I'm gaining muscle, so there must be something going well, because you're getting protein and all the other things in your body that you need in order to do that, because gaining muscle itself is not very easy. So the link then clicked for you, like, okay, Apparently my body is able to absorb a good amount of nutrition, and therefore I can try to disconnect from that tube and go into regular food to see if I can maintain that. And the answer to that question apparently was yes. Is that a summary of how it went?
Yeah, spot on, Jeffrey. That's exactly pretty
Right.
much how it went.
So what happened then? What did you disconnected from it? How did your what happened then?
What happened then? Well, eventually the feeding tube was gone. You know, it started with it just got taken out, and I don't know why, Jeff, but it literally just got taken out, and the hole that existed there was still there. And I don't know if it's because they wanted things to see if things could heal and close up, organically by themselves, but
Mm-hmm.
I my mom and I went to Panera to celebrate, and I don't want to gross anyone out here, but the hole was still there, right? And I ate some sandwich or panini from Panera, and I had a drink as well. And well, long story short, I'm consuming, and I feel this the weirdest feeling, Jeff. The weirdest feeling. I don't wish this on anybody, but the fluid just came out from directly from where the hole of the feeding tube was. As I was eating it, it was coming out of there, and almost like this ooze, and it was disgusting. And I was just like, as a teenager, I'm just like, this is cool, but also like, what's going on with me? So, uh,
That must have
it
been
must have been
quite the
quite the
experience.
experience.
How
How
how do so
so
how did you
how did you
solve that
solve
issue?
that
Did you
issue?
just
Did you
walk
just walk
away,
away,
or did you
or
go
did you go
home? Or
home? Or
because I can
because I can
imagine
imagine
that's quite the
the
thing to
thing to
happen when
happen
you're in the
when you're
middle
in
of
the
a
middle of a
restaurant.
restaurant. Sure is. My
Yeah.
shirt's getting a dark spot leaking and everything, and I'm not trying to make a scene. So I go, you know, I get some napkins to cover myself up underneath my shirt, and I show my mom, and she's like, "All right, we're gonna go to the hospital." So
Right.
long story short, we ended up going back, and they they put me under anesthesia, knocked me out, and they yeah, they glued it up.
Patched everything up.
Oh yeah. Now I can
Mm-hmm.
eat comfortably without anything oozing out of my body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now everything is like yeah, to use the word normal, now everything is as it should be.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And how old are you now? So how long is it since that has it been since that operation?
Oh, Jeff, I'm 28, so that was
12
yeah,
years.
12 years ago. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you went on to study brain health and nutrition.
Well, no, I would say kind of what led me into the brain health and nutrition is let's go back a little bit to I started doing therapy and I'm a huge mental health advocate. And, you know, my personal opinion, I think anybody should seek therapy. Whether they think they need it or not, I think it's always good to get that second opinion because, we don't always know everything. So our perceptions could be off on something. And honestly, that's where a professional can come into place who has a non unbiased opinion. So let's see.
What has therapy given you that you didn't know before you started it?
It's helped me see a lot of fogginess in my life that I wasn't seeing. And a lot of that stemmed from, well, just growing up in my childhood and my experience, which we can also get into if you'd like.
Yeah, if you're willing to do that, sure.
Oh yeah, I have no problem talking about it. I've talked about it in therapy. I've talked about it with other people, close friends, and it's like anything else that could be challenging in your life. The more we talk about it, the I guess the easier it can get to talk about, and also the more you can integrate that reality and help you move on if you did have a bad experience. So let's start. Um, so My parents split up when I was 2. They never got married, and my mother had full custody of me. My father, I saw him every other weekend via the court-ordered date system, and he was a long-distance trucker at the time, and he's still in the trucking business now. He just does overnights, short hauls, so he's definitely a local.
Hmm.
But when I was a kid growing up, for the most part, he wasn't around too much as far as him being away for weeks at a time, working, and understandable because it's his job and how he supported himself. Let's see. Living with my mom, it was, let's see, Townsend, Massachusetts is a big part of where I grew up and where I was raised. And I was living in a house of 16 people, and that's a combination of my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, my uncle, all my aunt's children slash my cousins, my older brother, older sister, and eventually my younger brother. And, 16 people is a lot. So
Why were they all living on the same address?
that's a good question, Jeff. Um, there's a lot of family secrets on both sides that, well, whether they're secrets or whether they're just topics that were too uncomfortable to
Hmm.
be had according to the other adults growing up around the children. Um, for some reason, those topics just didn't really get brought up and talked about. Um,
Right.
so a lot of it's a mystery for me, to be honest.
Hmm.
And I, it's difficult also to try to get clarity on it on my end because, I love my parents, and at the same time, there's conflict. And I'll say specifically with my mother that, there are things that went on in the house during when I was growing up that have affected me. And like anybody else, the experience we have in our lives are our experience. And, when people can try to tell you otherwise, even your own parents, unfortunately, but the reality is, you know, you had your experience and you want to talk about it. And when I tried to bring things up that, I felt were either wrong, affected me, and had an impact on, you know, how I kind of function on things that I improve on via therapy. And, you know, almost every single time it gets brought up or I try to bring it up, it gets deflected or defensive kind of area. So
Hmm.
it's it's difficult to have conversations with anybody when you're the only one, so to speak, trying to hold the weight of the conversation and, try to get clarity.
It sounds like there's a lot of history there, and it also sounds like you didn't really have the opportunity in that house with all those family members to discuss what you were thinking or what you were seeing. Um, you already aimed at it, how you feel about the situation. Can you walk me through that setting? So 16 family members, so 15 excluding yourself, um, living in that house, in the same house. Can you walk me through it? Like, how large was the house? How close were you with each other, like physically speaking? And how did daily life look then? So what would your daily routine be, for example? Can you walk me through that? How can you give me an idea of how it was living in that environment?
Sure can, Jeff, and thank you for asking. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the house was fairly large. Let's see, it was 2-story with a basement, and I forget the square footage. I want to say 3,000 or 2,500 or something like that. So it was
Mm-hmm.
a fairly large house, plenty of, a good amount of space for all of us. And let's see, it was a matter of from with my cousins slash all my aunt's kids, they lived upstairs, and that's where our bathroom was, as far as, a bathroom that my mom and all of us used. And it was interesting to me because the concept of what a family is for me growing up was kind of it just didn't seem like a very healthy healthy concept, so to speak. And what I mean by that is, so like I said, all my cousins lived upstairs, and for me, being a kid and trying to be social and, play and interact with people, um, it, we weren't really allowed to go upstairs and hang out with them in their rooms and play with them
With the
and
cousins.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a number of things that felt like the house was almost segregated, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, combine that with I wasn't really allowed to kind of go outside and, play with them too much unless I was severely supervised, so to speak. And
Why not? Do you know that?
why not? Well, not entirely, to be honest. And that's part of the questions I guess I need answers to. But what I can say is that, I was diagnosed with ADD or ADHD
Mm-hmm.
at a young age. And, I had a lot of energy, to burn off for sure. And, I was on medication as well, Ritalin, Focalin, and yeah, I have some doubts of whether or not I actually have ADD or ADHD, to be honest, because some of the side effects from what I researched with Ritalin and Focalin and other ADHD meds are
Mm-hmm.
kind of give me the opposite effect of, what it was supposed to do for me. And by that, I mean, whenever I was under the influence of that medication, I felt like an emotionless zombie, literally just going through the motions of the day and not really and feeling like I had like my personality drained out of me, if that makes sense.
It does.
Hmm.
Yeah, it does. I know quite a bit of people who were also on Ritalin and a related drug, Concerta. I'm not sure the second one you called. I don't know, but I know Ritalin and Concerta, and they would also describe it the way that you would describe it. So pretty much being a zombie and just doing your thing, I guess, whatever that thing may be.
Oh, it's good to know that, I'm not alone and
Mm-hmm.
kind of help validate the experience that I've had.
Why are you skeptical about the fact that you have ADHD? Is it so you mentioned the effect that the drug had on you, but is there anything else that makes you believe that?
Mm, I would say, well, let me kind of rephrase what I said. I I used to be skeptical, and that
Mm-hmm.
was due to my own, I guess, ignorance of not knowing too much about the condition.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, I found Dr. Daniel Amen, and he's the one that founded Amen Clinics. And the rest of the audience can't see, but those pictures that I emailed you of the brain scans
Mm-hmm.
are where those came from. And I can get into that in a little bit for sure, but I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to also get back to the previous conversation and just kind of bring that to a point, and then we can move forward from that.
Sure. Yeah. Let's just take our time. I'm just very interested in this specific topic and why you are why you think the ADHD diagnosis might not be completely accurate. So before we go there, let me ask you just a few questions.
Hmm.
You mentioned that in the house, you were kind of limited in who you could interact with and what you could do. So, an example that you gave is that you wanted to be social and you wanted to go to your cousin's room in order to interact with them, and you also wanted to go outside to play with them, and you weren't allowed to do that. So, there were limits in place that prevented you from not necessarily doing what you want, but from doing what you think what you found interesting, what you wanted to do, where your interest lies. Let me ask you a related question to that. So as a young kid, let's say 4 and 10 ish, around that time. So young, young years. Um, what were the things you were primarily interested in? So what naturally has your interest? And the second question is then, were you allowed to pursue those interests? Were you able to do that?
Let's see. Ages of 4 and 10, things that we're interested in.
Hmm.
Hmm. So even still today, I'm a huge fanatic of marine life. I mean, if you've ever gone scuba diving, or I highly recommend it to anybody. It is
Hmm.
a completely another world underwater, and I mean
Hmm.
that. It is gorgeous. Um, there's that. Let's see. It's kind of tough to answer that, Jeff, because growing up, it was very difficult for me socially and developmentally to, I guess, discover my own interests, so to speak. I felt like I had to walk on a lot of eggshells, um, growing up, and yeah, always catering to not disturbing the peace and always trying to be a good boy in the house too, to be honest. So it's honestly it's a little difficult to answer that question.
Did you like to play out? Were you more the person that would like to play outside, or were you more the person, for example, that would like to build things like with Duplo or Lego or stuff like that? Or did you like reading books or looking at images or drawing? Like these typical things that kids generally can interact with from a very young age. Do any of those stick out to you as something that you either found interesting or actively engaged in?
Okay. Yeah, and that helps. Let's see. Yeah, so I love to be outside as much as
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really able to be, but I enjoyed it for sure. Playing in the dirt, hitting trees with the sticks, and um, doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, the my mother got me it was a Game Boy Advance or Game Boy Advance SP. I don't know if it's public knowledge yet, but I recall from Peterson Academy on one of your posts that you're a video game connoisseur yourself. So
Yes,
Um,
sir.
that can definitely be a conversation for me as well. I
Mm-hmm.
um, Gaming is definitely a hobby of mine that's
Mm-hmm.
transferred over into my adult life as well, and
Mm-hmm.
it's an enjoyable thing to unwind and relax, and also a social thing too, I found. Um, so video games were I definitely a big influence for me in my interests.
Mm-hmm. And you got that Game Boy Advance, where you older than. So once again, what the reason why I'm asking these questions is because I'm trying to figure out, so in a very young age, what you were interested in. And you mentioned playing outside, playing with the trees, playing with sticks, hitting it around, and also video games. Those are primary interests of you. So first I'm trying to see what the things were that you were interested in. And the reason why I want to lay that foundation is because then I want to see um, if you were able to pursue those interests. And you kind of already hinted that the answer to that question is mostly no, if I summarize this correctly.
I would say that's a fair answer, yeah.
Right. There's something I learned quite recently, and I want to. Let me just share this with you and tell me what you think about this.
Please.
Young children who don't have the opportunity to pursue their interests because they're either being limited, they're not giving the opportunity, they're not giving the resources to pursue them or anything like that. So they can't pursue their interests, and they're being confined into a way of behaving, a way of living that, also limits them in all sorts of ways. Those children can start to act out, be hyperactive, or and I don't even want to use the word hyper in this case. So let's just say they will be active, very active. They can be rebellious, they can become very. They can opt out. They don't care anymore. They're very apathetic, I suppose would be the word to describe it. Those kind of things, those kind of symptoms, especially the one of becoming active, because you can't interact with your interests. Therefore, you're building up energy that you need to release as a kid, because every kid is like a Duracell bunny, right? They need to run around, they need to have fun, and they can't do that. So there's all this build up energy that they can't release because once again they're being limited. The fact that they become very active then is a symptom that might lead to an ADHD diagnosis. So and this is a personal opinion that I'm sharing with you right now. So I'm not telling that this is the way it is, but my personal opinion is that we are very easy as a society to give people the label ADHD and then start drugging them and then spin the narrative that these people, they have a underlying mental condition that they were born with that makes them autistic. And I'm not saying that that can't happen. I'm not saying that, you can't be born with something. But
Sure.
what I'm saying is a symptom that is being shown doesn't automatically correlate directly to something that you have been born with. And if that symptom gets answered with the same diagnosis and leads to drugging, which leads a kid to become a zombie, to use that word, that might not be the best thing for the kid, and that's saying it very lightly. What do you think about that?
I think I agree with you 100% on that concept, especially with what you said at the beginning, Jeff. I do strongly believe that as a society, we are very quick to try to do the quick fix of drugging something that we don't like instead of trying to delve into the actual root cause of what the issues are. Whether it's the environment that needs to be looked at and whatnot, which frankly, it's a big case for, I think, most kids or a lot of kids growing up, is they need to look at the environment first and how they are, what they're being exposed to on the regular. And absolutely, the whole concept of, drugging a little kid when they have all this energy and whatnot for the sake of trying to condition them and make them sit still and be obedient is, well, it's kind of cruel, you know, if you think about it. And especially with like little boys, because little boys tend to be more hyperactive, on average. And, as they get older, their testosterone starts to develop more and more, and they want to test the boundaries a little bit, and
Hmm.
this is where,
Like every kid.
yeah, right, right, especially as a teenager, you
Hmm.
want to assess the boundaries, and why should and that's
And you
understandable.
should. Hmm.
Right, you should, because like your experience is your experience, and then you want to see what's out there as you grow up, for the sake of developing more as your own individual.
Hmm. Yeah, and you're learning how the world works. You're learning how people work. You learn where the limits lie, what you can do and what you cannot do. So it's very good that children do things that, for example, are not allowed because they don't know it's not allowed yet. They have to do something in order to be corrected, so they know where the proper boundaries are that people set for them. That's like a feedback loop that leads to children or people in general being well balanced and being ready to go into society. That's how literally how it works. But instead of creating that feedback loop, and like you said, and I think that the first thing that you said, about looking at the environment, that's a crucial thing. Instead of looking at the environment, we put a label on a person and we start drugging them. And that, like this is a very deep topic, and we can discuss this for a long time. But one of the things, for example, that really makes me angry if I think about this is if I ask myself the question, what are the incentives in this whole situation? And then you look at those drugs, for example, like Concerta that I mentioned earlier. Do you have any idea how expensive Concerta is?
I can imagine it's very expensive without insurance, but tell me.
So I looked this up, um, unrelated to this conversation, but I looked at this a week ago, and I found that a box of 30 pills of Concerta is around, if I remember correctly, 350 euros or dollars. That is insane for 30. That is insane. So, yeah, if you have a company that's producing a lot of Concerta, there's a pretty clear incentive to sell as much as you can. I mean, okay, I'm linking things together right now that we shouldn't maybe link together, but the point I'm trying to make is, not looking at the environment and labeling people and going the drugging route might not be the best thing for the child. And once again, that's saying it very lightly.
I agree, and as far as that goes, Jeff, this is just a open-minded conversation we're having, so I'm good and free for letting the conversation flow wherever it needs to.
How was your relationship with your mother, especially during the time that you were living in that house with 16?
Well, when I was living there, I was very much a mama's boy, and you know, and I love her still, and that won't change. And I really felt like I loved her, like any kid, right? Or
Hmm.
most kids out there. She's my mom. And same thing with my father, which, we can talk about more as well to keep things fair, because I love him too.
Hmm.
But, um, as a kid growing up, you don't know much. And yeah, you only know as far as what your experience is. And my relationship with her it was decent. It was pretty good as a kid growing up, and then, as I got older as a teenager, and go back to the whole testing the boundaries things, and I observed then and still observe today certain things that, I just can't tolerate, to be honest. And it's definitely brought friction in the relationship, and we honestly haven't really talked hardly at all in the last few years. And let's see. Yeah, so there's things like that. And then, with my father, I had a lot of resentment built up towards him for a long time, Jeff. And, strictly from the fact of him not being around, whether it was his fault or not, I was ignorantly going off of that sole fact and letting that kind of run my judgment of him. And you talk about Peterson Academy as well. I found the boy crisis, and man, what an insight. I don't know if you've looked into the course at all. Have you?
I know what it's about. I think at least it's kind of in the name, but I haven't seen it yet. No.
Okay. So, yeah, let's see. Yes, like I said, I saw my dad every other weekend, and roughly, you know, when he eventually changed jobs, him and I have had a conversation about it and about, how he changed jobs because, well, my mom would just play those games like a lot of others do, unfortunately, where they have this, the mothers have full custody, and I don't want this to come across as me demonizing single mothers or anything, but
Hmm.
um, you know, it's like it's hard for me not to, put two and two together, especially with my experience. Um, and with my dad not being around too much, and he eventually told me that, well, he told me that he eventually switched jobs to better accommodate the schedule for the little time that he was able to see, his two kids at the time. And, so I think that says a lot about him as a father and as a man. And, I it's it's great, really. And our relationship, him and I, isn't the best either. And that's something I've been working on and talking about in therapy as well. Whereas, just trying to muddle through all the resentment I had towards him and really trying to just come at it from the angles of the facts of, you know, what actually happened, what the reality was, and what the outcome was. You know what I mean?
So you mentioned that this resentment, you linked it to him being away from the house for a lot because of his work. Is that the only reason, or is there anything else that played into that resentment? Why did you feel resentment towards him? What did you miss?
Oh, it's a deep question, Jeff, and I appreciate you asking. Let's see. Yeah, I miss definitely him being around, and and as I think about it too, like I looked forward as a kid going to his house because it was an escapism from
Hmm.
the what it was on the typical day to day for me growing up, and let's see, you know, yeah, but circling back to answering your question, I would say resentment would stem from his absence again, whether it's his fault or not, and he has the tendencies, even still today, to get to project his frustration and not and there's a communication barrier between us too that's also conflicting. And I really think if him and I got that down, that would definitely improve our relationship.
What do you mean by a communication barrier?
Uh, just the lack of contact on both of our ends.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, that's the main thing. He does try to reach out and whatnot, and I'm learning to, like I said, wave away or wave through my resentment and try to come to grip with what reality was. And, learning through the boy crisis and getting that insight has helped me a lot. And I'm all about trying to develop and try to see different perspectives despite of what an experience was, because like I said, just trying to personal self development and grow as a person, and yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's it really sounds once again like there's a lot of history there. A lot has happened, A lot is still happening, and it sounds like you are wanting to move towards something that resembles a stable relationship with both your mother and your father. Um, if I would ask you the question, like, if you could decide, if you could choose how that relationship with with both your parents would look tomorrow, let's say, what would your description of that be? Where would you work towards?
Do you mean as far as how it would look for me if things were better?
Yes. So how the relationship would be between you and your parents, either individually or both of them.
Hmm. I would say, well, for both of them would be actually wanting to spend time with them and, looking forward to it. As it stands right now, I don't. Holidays are uncomfortable, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but it's, you know, a lot of mystery and subtle distrust in the relationships. So I feel like if a lot of that was worked on, there'd be more open, honest communication to be able to just talk to each other and feel comfortable to talk to each other without fear of overjudgment and gaslighting and guilt tripping, because those are things that are definitely stand in the relationship currently, specifically with my mother. And, if I could have it, I would say, you know, everybody just being willing to talk to each other and, you know, as a respected an adult rather than, you're coming from the angle and lens of being, your kid as a kid.
Do you have anybody that's helping you with this?
The majority of it is therapy and talking to my good friend Adam. I've known him since I lived in Townsend, and he's one of my best friends, and he studies psychology as well. And he's also partly helped to understand the concept of resentment and trying to understand and let it go. So those would be the main two.
Mm-hmm. What I've personally experienced and what I found very helpful. So it's a long question, so let me give you some context. Um,
Okay.
as a young kid, it's obviously very hard to understand the nuances of a situation that lead to all sorts of problems down the line, um, which cause which causes relationships to be strained. If you're thinking back about that right now as a 28-year-old, um, the only data point that you have is your own memory from that time. And that's very likely a very incomplete picture to draw conclusions on and to build upon in order to understand what happened and why it happened and how it could be different and what was outside of your power, all these sorts of things. So what I found is that if there is a person, usually an adult, that was with you around that time, and that is a person who is reasonable and honest and can share that experience with you, that person can provide you a way to analyze the situations from back in the day and give you a new perspective on that, which you can use then to better understand what happened then. So um, that's the context. Is there anybody so when you were very young, is there an adult, for example, that was pretty close to you or looked over you from a distance, for example, a teacher or Um, yeah, maybe somebody else who is close to the family. Do you have a person like that that can help you shed some light on what happened, so you can then start understanding why the things happened that happened, and then you can put that in its correct place, and then build towards yeah, fixing relationships based upon that stable foundation.
Firstly, Jeff, that's amazing insight, and I appreciate that because, yeah, like I said, just coming from the angle of trying to understand different perspectives and how I can understand and adopt things. Let's see. Short answer, um, no, for the most part. And I say that as far as the adults that were involved with um, growing up and whatnot were my obviously mother, father, and all the adults growing up in there. And there weren't many adults that kind of came over in that house of my mother's in Townsend
Mm-hmm.
growing up. So there wasn't much of an opportunity to connect with other adults that the family knew, so to speak. And then with my father, it was his um, my first stepmother. She she she's noticed things and from my understanding has spoken up, and I could reach out to her and ask a few things outside of kind of what I know. And she she's had a tough life as well, and she, as far as trying to get a sense of somebody that you can really trust their judgment and what they're saying. It's to be honest, like no one really comes to mind from the family perspective. And then we go into my good buddy Adam that I mentioned before. I would escape most days, almost every day. I wouldn't go home from school when I got dropped off at the bus, and I would get dropped off at this little plaza, and I would
Mm-hmm.
hang out at this pizza shop, to escape the house and hang out there, or I would go to, my buddy Adam's place, and his parents are good people too, and they're from a different, definitely a different dynamic over there. So, I would talk to them here and there, and they would say some things and whatnot. And even today, they still kind of say some things. So actually, if I think about it, and I'm glad I am, they might be somebody I could talk to as well, even though they weren't directly um, involved and talk to my family. So that's where it becomes tricky, though. So
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
so we can talk to about some more of the other stuff, though. I'm totally open to.
Yeah, is there anything? So, is there anything that you would still like to mention on this front? Something that you think is interesting to mention, some piece of context, or some other ideas that you think um, are valuable?
Let's see. Yeah, well, let's go into so fast forward past all that, going
Mm-hmm.
into therapy and going through different therapists because something that's very, very crucial for therapy to actually be effective is you need to have a good relationship with a therapist. And trial and error, I've been through somewhere around four different therapists and whatnot. Some were helpful, some were definitely not. And, talking to them and going on into as I get older or got older into today, I came across Dr. Daniel Amen. And Yeah, let's talk about more of that. So he go ahead.
And you said you encountered some clinicians that were helpful and some clinicians that were not helpful. How did you determine which were helpful and how did you determine which weren't helpful? And what specifically did I do that wasn't helpful? So this is also more like a practical question for everybody who's listening. What do they have to look out for to determine if their therapist is not being helpful?
Okay, great question. I would say let's start with what's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
A therapist who's going to continually enable your bad behaviors and actions that you are doing despite them knowing or not knowing better. Well, let's say knowing better. Um, and just kind of letting and and essentially they need to call you out on your own BS, to be frank. But, you have to work up to that in your relationship. If you're with
Mm-hmm.
a therapist right off the bat, if you're new to therapy and it's your first therapist or two, specifically your first, right? I would say, you don't know because you're going in blind. It's your
Mm-hmm.
first time, it's foreign territory.
Yeah.
And, a therapist has to earn that trust with you, just like anybody else with any other type of relationship. And, eventually once they do, then, you know, ideally and hopefully they'll have sense enough about them to be more blunt and outspoken for well, for your own behalf. Because why else are you going, right? You're going to a therapist because obviously things in your life aren't going well
Mm-hmm.
and you want things to improve. And if they're gonna keep dancing around in circle on the same topic and you're not getting any progress and progressing and moving forward from something that you've been struggling with, that's a waste of your time and that's a waste of their time. So,
Yeah, and it doesn't lead anywhere.
right, right. And
Mm-hmm.
then let's go into what would be helpful. What would be helpful is, you know, the opposites of what I've mentioned for what wouldn't be helpful. You want somebody, you know, that can be blunt and honest with you and give you that feedback. Now, they don't have to be a complete jerk about it, but there's you want someone to keep you accountable for sure. And maybe after your first experience with a therapist, if it didn't work out, you kind of know what to look for if it's going to work out or not a little bit better. So you go into your next session, right, with another therapist, and maybe you're a little bit more open to the idea of, giving them that trust a little bit early to be blunt with you and be
Mm-hmm.
more outspoken for the sake of making progress, right? Because again, why would you the point of therapy is to improve and just get better. So yeah, that's something that would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, that sounds it makes sense. So there, talking has a value in the sense of you can walk through things, you can understand things, and then you can take that understanding and do something specific with that. So it's like a feedback loop in which you create the knowledge in order to attack specific things that you are dealing with. And if I think you have a good therapist, you have a dynamic in which you have that feedback loop that leads um, towards attacking those challenges pretty much. And I think that what you said with regarding to the therapists that were not helpful, they were just talking without it being productive, without it giving you the tools to do something, or without telling you like, hey, Mitchell, is it okay if I'm honest with you? I'm hearing you say something that doesn't make any sense and that is destructive or whatever, and you should change that. I think in this and this specific way. So that specific feedback you didn't get from them. So it was pretty much just yeah talk for the time that you had, and it didn't lead anywhere. Is that a correct summary?
I would say for the most part, yeah, Jeff.
Hmm.
And eventually, I did have a couple of therapists that, one or two out of the four or five that I've talked to that were, I guess, courageous or brave enough to, well, to be outspoken enough to, yeah, just keep me accountable or just be honest with what their perspective is. And it's like active listening is definitely an important component. You want to make sure you're hearing them properly and
Hmm.
understanding what the story is.
Hmm.
And but that can also be an endless cycle. Um, and what I mean by that is you can continue to listen and listen and listen and, politely and not politely interject when you think you need to address something that, you know, you think should and needs to be addressed.
Hmm. I wonder where the line is, though. So I spoke a couple of weeks ago with Adam Ayala, who is a psychotherapist. That was episode number 7. And what he described to me, so he's different than a psychologist, and we had some contact after that conversation. And the way that psychology versus psychotherapy was being defined is that a psychoanalyst will focus on the root cause, and a psychologist will focus on the symptom and treat that. And the reason why I'm saying that is because he described in our conversation that he would often, for multiple sessions, would not say a thing. He would just listen. He would let the person explore their lives and tell their stories, and just see with their third eye what they needed to see, pretty much. And only even if those people, those clients of his, asked a question that was not directed at him, he would not engage with that. With that, he would just listen to them, because often he found that the people that he was listening to were just asking the questions pretty much to themselves. They were just thinking. They were following their own path. So he didn't say much, and that was, for as far as I understood it, pretty fruitful. And the moment that his clients would look at him and say, hey, what I'm saying right now, does that make sense? Or something like, do you hear anything that I'm saying that I should change? Or, when a question is directly um, aimed at him, that's when he would engage, and that's when he would give his insight to the situation. But that was, and it makes sense, because it it gives people a way to both explore the challenges that they are dealing with, explore the moments in their lives that led up to this point, and lets them think out loud about problems. You could call it kind of rubber ducking. In the IT branch, you would call it rubber ducking. It's like the idea of putting a rubber duck in front of you and just telling your story to that rubber duck. And the moment you say that story out loud, all of a sudden you will hear, you will start noticing things, things that are out of place or not in order, or you can make sense of it. Um, and that's a good way to think. Anyway, so that's the psychoanalytical part, where he focused on to get, mostly by listening, on the root cause and then addressing that root cause, where a psychologist is, for as far as I understood it from him at least, is focused more on the symptom. You are showing a specific symptom, you are dealing with a specific problem. We are going to solve that problem, and not the underlying root cause. This also goes back to earlier in our conversation. Remember when we talked about ADHD, and then getting the symptom hyperactivity treated, which leads to drugging, instead of looking at the environment, which would be one of the potential root causes. That's what a psychologist generally does, for as far as my understanding goes. So if I'm saying anything that's incorrect or incomplete, let me know. The point I'm trying to make, and this is my question, is you were dealing with psychologists who were then, within this logic, primarily focused on dealing with the symptom. Um, and in that specific situation, you would you need a feedback loop. You need somebody to so that's let me see if I can get this straight. That symptom exists for a reason. So something has led to that symptom, and what you don't know what that is per se. Maybe you do implicitly, but you don't know it per se because else that symptom wouldn't exist. I think that's a pretty fair summary. So this is where your comment makes sense. You need a psychologist to tell you, hey, Mitchell, this is the exact thing that is causing this whole situation. So if we focus on zeroing in on that specific thing, we can solve that. We can do something with that. Um, that's the mechanism that you were missing with the quote unquote bad psychologist then. Does it make sense?
It absolutely does, Jeff. And your explanation of the two different parties there, it is pretty well said as well. And it's a matter of, yeah, just getting to the root cause and talking about and letting that be the focal point is definitely huge because you're doing two things at the same time. You're understanding what the root cause is and you're addressing that and hopefully directly. And you're also validating somebody's experience, which is absolutely crucial and huge, especially if you kind of have fairly low self-esteem and you're just trying to get answers to certain things, which is it, and it's huge, as far as trying to, talk more directly about the root cause. Let's see. Mm. And I've talked to psychiatrists and psychologists both, and yeah, I would say for sure the experience I've had when it came to a psychiatrist is definitely symptoms based, right? Because primarily they're focused on treating the symptoms via medication and other avenues that they learned through their schooling and education. Whereas, the other is, the active listening and passive listening of a
Mm-hmm.
of a psychologist is, well, yeah, it seems to they both have their benefits for sure. I would say, back to the whole conversation of relying pretty much almost too much and immediately on the medications to treat, a symptom, because,
Mm-hmm.
bringing Dr. Daniel Amen back into this, he talks about when the concept of when you're trying to help somebody and what modern psychiatry does is it focuses on the symptom and the behavior and you're trying to treat that rather than focus and try to treat and improve the problem because behavior and the symptoms are an expression of the problem. They're not the actual problem.
Has he been able to zero in on some root causes with you?
I would say it's been very insightful with a lot that I've learned, Jeff. I didn't work directly with him, although I wish I did or I
Mm-hmm.
could. And, if he's listening to this, Dr. Amen, I would love to meet together sometime. Um, it was Dr. Grin out of his New York clinic, because I'm in New Hampshire. I drove like 4.5 hours one way to go over there, and I was really inspired and really passionate and into what they were basically the concept of that is Amen Clinics. And so let's talk about this a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please.
So they do a study called SPECT, SPECT,
Mm-hmm.
and it stands for Single Photon Emissions Computerized Tomography. And it's a fancy way of saying it's a type of brain scan. And if you look at what I sent you via the pictures through email, there's two types of scans based on two ways of how they scan you. Now, how they scan you is the two ways are they scan you at baseline, just kind of how you are in the day-to-day normal when you're in your typical relaxed state, and then your concentration. And they do a test where the concentration test, you have to either hit every time you see an X or the opposite. But anyways, you're trying to concentrate on that. And they have, your brain is getting wired up, whether you're doing the concentration or it's trying to, be calm and get to that baseline, hence concentration to baseline. And then what they end up doing is they inject you with some form of fluid, and I forget the name of it, but they hook you up to the machine and it scans you. Scans around your head and scans your brain. And what it's doing is it's doing a surface level scan, which is the
Mm-hmm.
one, the very colored ones, the rainbow looking ones that I sent you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you have the activity scans. Now, the activity scans are where it really gets interesting, Jeff. So, for anyone listening, you want to take the time at some point to look up what a spec scan looks like. You'll see the activity scans and surface scans to what I'm talking about. And
Would it be
the
okay? So obviously there's some medical information on the right side, so I'll cut that out. But would you be fine with me putting the images themselves within the video so people can actually see it while we are talking about it? Is that okay?
I have no problem at all. I am completely open to sharing the knowledge for sure.
Okay, I'll make sure to cut the right part out where the information is in. But perfect, awesome. Um, yeah, so there's maybe we can go through them side by side and start with the baseline ones. So I see the one with the blue grid right now, and I assume those are the active spars. That those are like white and red. What do I see? What do I see there? What should I? How should I interpret this?
Okay, so using the blue, the white, and the red pictures are what you're looking at, correct?
Yes, the baseline one, the blue and the red one. So the blue
Okay,
grid. Yeah.
okay, so you're looking at the baseline activity, Jeff.
Yes.
So that one, so you obviously have the blue, the red, and the white. And what those
Mm-hmm.
colors represent are the different levels of activity and blood flow. You have blue is low, red is typical moderate, white is white hot, very active.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, from my understanding, so your brain, different parts of your brain function different ways of your being. And at the same time, they're all tied together and communicate and transfer the information to each other. Now, let's see. You have the very back part of your brain, which is your cerebellum. Back, it's at the rear bottom part of your brain. And you see the majority of the white activity there. That is typically, from my understanding of how it kind of should be, or for a typical
Mm-hmm.
brain. Whereas you want the higher levels of activity in your cerebellum to, and then it transfers over and it goes into the middle part. I'm sure you see the white part there.
Mm-hmm.
That is your limbic system, specifically the thalamus.
It's a very small little white dot in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You got it. So that small white dot they talked about for me is my thalamus, which is in my limbic system. Now, in the area or system, it basically regulates and sets your emotional tone and also regulates and sets your mood and how you kind of bond socially too. So a lot of the social emotional dynamics are very much involved there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's see. I would say it's fair for me to say that I'm a fairly sensitive individual. I would say more sensitive than the average person. And when you compare to the picture here of the baseline activity scan compared to the baseline activity scan of the typical neurotypical brain, it doesn't look like this. So my thalamus slash
Okay.
limbic area is more active, meaning my emotional regulation centers are higher in activity than your typical person. And
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, when I was hearing the stuff get discussed with Dr. Grin at Amen Clinics in New York, it was mind blowing because we talked about early in the conversation about the validation of one's own experience.
Yep.
Brother, this was huge for me. It was absolutely huge for me. Because I've noticed that about myself, how I didn't fit in socially as much, and and okay, fair enough to say that, when you're a kid, you don't always fit in anyways, and you have to find your tribe and your group, and you're branching out to explore that. But, you know, I struggled for a long time just taking things, you know, personally, where it seemed like it almost didn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether that's inside my control or not, you know, this is just proving and helping me understand that, like, dude, this is real. Like, you're not crazy for having your experience. So, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's telling you pretty much why you are experiencing what you're experiencing in a very technical way. Mhm. What other insights did you get from this? So what else did you learn from this, from seeing this, or from the explanation that you got about this?
What did I learn?
Hmm.
More about the I learned all about brain health and brain activity and the neuroscience uh course in Peterson Academy is definitely going to be on my list soon. Let's see. Just learning about how much it all ties in together and correlates. And, you know, how nutrition plays a crucial role in all of this stuff too, and how your brain develops and whatnot. Because, well, your brain is roughly at least 60% made up 60% fat. So what does that mean? You have to feed whatever organ it is w- of what it's comprised of. So
Hmm.
and
That's why you
and
take protein to build muscle.
yes, yes, sir, exactly that. And you know, with that concept being said, right, of matching whatever the organ is and
Hmm.
needing that nutrition,
Hmm.
it 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 just further developed my curiosity for nutrition, understanding all the healthy eating and how detrimental the standard American diet is for people, because you have it for a long time, and even still today, due to research not being as accessible and available and as it is now, we were living on fat-free diets, and that was huge. uh, getting shoved down people's throats and all sorts of, whether it's some media stations or in the schools as well, the academic societies, in the vending machines and in the lunches that got served, a lot of it was, fat free. And
Hmm.
I look back and into today, and here I am, like, learning about this as far as, like, okay, you got to feed the organ what it's pretty much consisted of, and the brain is made up of majority of fat, so you need to feed the brain fat. Now, trans fat, that's different because that's manufactured, and that's that's not natural.
Mm-hmm.
You want the natural fats,
Mm-hmm.
like in bacon or even steak, beef.
Mm-hmm.
Steak has fat, and that fat is good. Now you want to trim a little bit off, but anyways, I'm going a little off topic. The the point is with when I was discovering about these brain scans, Jeff, is this is where the heavy interest in nutrition got even heavier. From the feeding tube and then to the brain scans. Here we are. And then I'm researching and I'm finding all different things, whether I'm researching things on YouTube and coming across a guy, he's got a book. It's called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. And, that book it tells a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool because it breaks down it it shows very early in the book a lot of the vitamins and nutrients and minerals that we miss out typically on a daily basis as Americans. And the author of the book is Drew Ramsey, by the way, for anyone listening. And let's see. So as I was saying, it breaks down, very, very simplified understandings of one, what the vitamins and minerals can do for you, and two, what foods you can commonly and mostly find them in, and three,
Mm-hmm.
what it does to you if you don't have those, if you're deficient in those vitamins and minerals and nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And it blew my mind, the more I'm just learning about this stuff and, tying into the towards the beginning of this conversation about, not accepting the hand that you're dealt and like how you really can improve your quality of life and your ways and sense of being by by willingly wanting to learn more than you already know.
For sure. I heard a lot of horror stories about the American standard diet. And I'm not sure if this is true, but one thing that's being repeated is that most of the food that's being sold in the United States would even be illegal to sell here in the Netherlands, just because it, for example, contains too much sugar in the shelf items, or because the vegetables have been sprayed with how do you call those things?
The pesticides and hormones.
Yes, exactly. Um, so all those kind of things, and I believe what was it that 60% or 70% of the American standard diet is just hyper processed food, something like that.
So, well, the 60% came with the what the brain is consisted of, which is fat. And as far as the standard American diet, I mean, I couldn't tell you the percentage, but it's
Hmm.
definitely huge, and it's definitely something that's encouraged and enabled due to obviously the grocery stores and what's affordable for most Americans.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny because you used the word anxiety just now when you were describing what a lack of nutrition from, in this case, from your diet can cause. But it's also the other way around. What too much of something can cause, and the reason why the word anxiety triggered me is because um, for as far as I know, on average, the products that are being sold in the United States have a lot more sugar in them than in other places, at least where I live in Western Europe, or in my case in Netherlands. And sugar, and this is something I've learned from Andrew Huberman a while back. So anything that tastes sweet apparently has a very potent ability to release dopamine in the brain. And
Yes.
dopamine triggers then feelings like pleasure, satisfaction, and I believe it also directly motivates us to recreate the action that led to that release of dopamine. Therefore, putting us in a loop that leads us to chase sweet tasting foods again in the future. And limiting that is fine, I suppose, because your body can process it. It's fine. But when it spirals out of control, there are all sorts of problems that too much sugar causes. Things like weight gain, things like risk for type 2 diabetes, increased
Mm-hmm.
risk for cancer, but also depression, anxiety, and it also causes things like rapid aging of the skin and cells in the body. So, sugar is one of these things that, um, in my personal opinion, is not demonized enough. Sugar is fine in amounts, but it's not good. It's in everything. It's in absolutely everything almost.
Absolutely, Jeff. Holy cow. No, and you're hitting the head on the nail there for sure. And well, there's a few things I could talk about there with that. I would say one is yes, standard the ultra processed foods within the
Hmm.
standard American diet are designed to be addictive, primarily to your point with, all the excess sugar. And
Hmm.
we know that what that can cause. It causes excess inflammation in the body.
Yep.
And and something about inflammation is that's where cancer cells latch onto and grow and
Hmm.
develop. So for people out there listening, as far as, you know, whether it's in their genetic, I guess, how do I want to say it? It's hereditary with cancer that runs in your family. And like you shouldn't accept the hand that you're given just because, you know, it's in your genes and it's in your family history to be prone to get whatever illness and dementia or arthritis or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Like food really is medicine, and you take the time to, get your mindset straight as far as not accepting it and actually, well, giving yourself a shot of a better life too. And it goes back to the Jordan Peterson quote of, treat yourself like you're someone responsible for helping.
Hmm.
Um, which I try to live by that day to day. And I'm not perfect, but you know, definitely way better off than I used to be. And circling back to the whole nutrition thing, another thing, Jeff, is the artificial food dyes as well that I'm
Hmm.
sure you may or may not know. Over in Europe, it's illegal, absolutely illegal to have in the foods, and
Hmm.
for good reason, because
Hmm.
it's not food. It should not be ingested and put into your body. And a lot of that leads into developments of dementia, whatever the food dyes is. For those again listening, like do your research and find out what it does, and you'll be in for a rude awakening and a shock. Now, hopefully, a good kind of shock where it's gonna, you know, wake you up to what you could be potentially putting into your body. But the good thing is you can do something about it. But circling back, yes, inflammation, stems from, or excuse me, the cancer stems and grows in inflammation. And a lot of that inflammation can be tackled and definitely managed and improved upon through cleansing your liver. Now,
Hmm.
the liver is huge because it's the filtration system of your body. Literally everything that passes into your body gets filtered through the liver. And that's why people who are alcoholics are, they have to get liver transplants, whatnot, depending on how severe it
Hmm.
is,
Hmm.
because they're not allowing their body or their liver to, recover and heal and get better. Because the liver is
Right.
incredibly good, right? And the liver is incredibly resilient given, enough time to heal. Because, well, it's there to process and to filter. That's a
Hmm.
big job. And yeah, so a lot of the inflammation kind of stems from there. And the whole fatty liver that, is fairly common over here in America, obviously caused through the standard American diet and all the ultra processed foods and whatnot. You know, look into how you can decrease inflammation in your body is probably the biggest takeaway from the statement that I'm making, because you're gonna save yourself a hell of a lot of a headache, and you're gonna feel amazing, and you're gonna notice it. And I've experimented and noticed it with myself as well. I grew up on, like most Americans, on ultra processed foods and stuff. And, you know, and fast forward to here we are today. Like, I get a meat delivery service from, it's called Heartstone Farms, and they're great. They send grass-fed organic meat, and, beef
Mm.
and chicken, and I've
Mm-hmm.
been huge on that, and I'm not doing a
Beautiful.
carnivore. Yeah, man, it is, and I'm not doing a carnivore diet, but that I would say most of my meals and nutrition throughout the day, I would say 60 to 70% of it is beef of some sort. And it's
Mm-hmm.
been huge. It's improved. Like, I've seen my inflammation. I feel it in my body, and I plan on getting more blood tests fairly soon as well. And you see it in your face and your neck. Similarly with people that are losing weight. So, and I was just blown away, to be honest, Jeff, once I started doing that. And once I started seeing those results that I achieved from doing that, like, I didn't go back. So,
Mm-hmm. It's so I'm 33 right now. Um,
oh, we're close to the
and
same age.
yeah, 5 years difference. I'm from 91.
Okay.
But the thing that I noticed in my 30s, and this is actually the first time I noticed that, is that my peers, so who are the same age, okay, so let me put this different. I've been for quite a long time been very aware of eating healthy. I do sin every now and then, right? So I have my regular, bag of potato chips, although I take them oven baked. So that's my defense. But I do
Okay.
have it every now and then. I have my Cola Zero every now and then, although it's like a couple of times a year, not more than that. So every now and then, I'm good. I'm fine. But generally speaking, I eat very healthy. I eat fresh. We cook at home, and we limit the amount of processed food, even to the point that we, for example, don't take like these jars with vegetables in it, right? We want to use fresh vegetables. We go to the market, get fresh asperges, for example, stuff like
Right
that.
on.
That's beautiful. And combine that with proper training, so doing resistance training, in my case martial arts, cardiovascular training, that kind of stuff, and you're pretty much good to go. You're fine, and it's not perfect, but generally speaking, it's good to go. What I've noticed since my 30s is the difference in how old people look when they're 30. It's bizarre. Sometimes you see people. I didn't have this experience in my 20s at all. Sometimes you see people in their 30s that are, they look good, they have a good shape in their body, they look healthy, they walk up straight, their skin is fine, right? And all of a sudden, you also see people that are like also 30 or even younger than me. They might be your age, for example, but they look way older, like they're 20 years older than I am. And I truly believe that comes down. Well, there might be, of course, exceptions to that rule. So I'm not saying this as it's an absolute, but generally speaking, I think it boils down a lot to nutrition and training. These two things. It's a very. I don't think people understand well enough how silly that even may sound, because it is something that's often being portrayed in the media, like eat healthy and that kind of stuff. Yet it feels to me like it's very easy not to do any training and just to grab a quick bite at your local fast food restaurant, for example. Um, and that's a shame. That's not a good thing, I think.
Oh, I would agree with you 100%, brother. It's not a good thing as far as I can see as well. Because, I mean, yes, you have the ease and the convenience of that, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why fast food stations are so popular.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I don't have to cook. I just have to wait in line, and then boom, here's my food, regardless of how ungodly unhealthy it is.
Mm-hmm.
And You know, it it is as simple as those two concepts to you said, nutrition and exercise. And it doesn't have to be your whole life too. You just implement a little bit at a time, especially if you're someone that is listening to this and you do want to improve and want to get better on this stuff and say that you know, say that you are someone that could, stand to be a little bit healthier in your life. You don't have to go 0 to 100 right off the bat,
Hmm.
and that's because 'cause you're just gonna get completely discouraged and lose the motivation to want to be disciplined with it, and yeah, you just start small, like, really.
And technically, that's also the best way to do it. And it also comes down to the training part. If you don't do anything, and all of a sudden you start training for 5 hours straight, well, you're gonna get a heart attack. That's generally speaking not the best way to do it. And on top of that, also from a practical standpoint, right? You have your agenda, you have your life, you have your routine that you are living by. So all of a sudden, disrupting that in a massive way, um, it completely throws your routine upside down, which might not be the best way. Like you said, there's no way that you will maintain that. So taking very small steps is a very good thing. But also, it boils down to, at least to a degree, to also combating the the signals that are happening within your brain and your body, because I think our choice of food is deeply influenced by signals in our brain and body. Like, you want to snack on something, or you want to crave on specific foods. And these signals, I think, happen before we're even aware of them. So before we even realize, like, hey, what are we doing? We already have the bag of potato chips. At least that's how it works with me, right? I'm all of a sudden I'm in a mood for something, and then I'm walking to the fridge to get it without me even realizing, like, oh, wait a second, it's 10 o'clock in the evening. This might not be the best idea. So, there's. Do you think we should combat these signals in our brain and body? And if yes, what are some practical tips that you could give to do that? Aside from taking small steps, are there some more things that you can give as practical tips?
Yes, I would say to start, uh, fasting is not inherently terrible for you, as much as some people might argue the fact that you're not feeding and fueling your body, which I think we all can agree that that is a necessity in life. Food is a
Mm-hmm.
necessity. Now, when you fast, you're giving your body a chance to reset and catch up. Because if you're constantly eating, your body is constantly in that mode where it's trying to constantly digest, and this is where the keto diet can come into effect and be, pretty beneficial for a lot of people. It's 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 that initial hunger feeling and impulse while you're fasting for, the first week or two that is uncomfortable for people, and that's kind of pretty much where it starts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also when you fast and do your research on this too, when you fast, from my understanding and what I've noticed and understand, is you're also simultaneously tackling the inflammation problem that we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's huge. It's a win-win, really. And I'm not saying to go, 18, 24 hours all the time with the fasting, but I eat my first meal when I wake up, and when I wake up and throughout the day, I have my first meal at typically 10:30 to 11:30 in the morning. And because I've conditioned and my body, so to speak, to understand, okay, this is what we're doing now. And
How late do you wake up?
typically it depends on the day, I would say, but I would say
Mm-hmm.
on average anywhere between 6 and 7:30, depending on what I'm doing.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I would say, start with trying to, well, number one, definitely analyze what you're putting into your body for food. That I think should be absolutely number one. And do your research as far as, the ingredient label list. If you don't recognize it and you can't really pronounce it, it's a good general consensus of you probably shouldn't be putting that in your body.
Yeah, not without thinking about it at least.
Right.
Yeah.
So, um, definitely start there. And then, whole solid foods. Jeff, you mentioned doing your farmer's
Mm-hmm.
market and
Mm-hmm.
shopping there. It's absolutely great for you and anybody else that does that because that's real food grown in real dirt, typically not with hormones and pesticides or anything like that you find in
Mm-hmm.
the supermarkets and the grocery
Mm-hmm.
stores. So definitely being conscious and aware of what you're putting into your body, number one, and then going into looking into, you know, doing some fasting and realizing that, you don't always need to be constantly eating. And like I said before, your body is gonna have to adjust to that, and you're gonna get some growing pains, so to speak, with
Mm-hmm.
that. But that's just your body adjusting. But I can almost guarantee you that if you do that and you let your body adjust after a couple of weeks of doing that, it will adjust. You won't have as much of those cravings combined with being more conscious and implementing healthier, better foods for you, you will 100% notice a change in your body.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but at the beginning, so you wake up. So the moment you wake up, there's around 3 to 4 hours that you are not eating. Are you drinking anything like water or milk or coffee or anything like that?
Oh, for sure. So me personally, I 99% of what I, or well, 90% of what I take in for liquids is typically just water, filtered
Right.
and
Yeah.
with lemon if I can, because that's going to help with
Beautiful.
the anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, vitamin C is a very good one to have, and it just makes the water more tasty. So that's also a practical reason to put it in.
Oh yeah, but I've been doing pretty much strictly water for years now that it,
Hmm.
it doesn't faze me anymore. But
Hmm.
for other people out there who are just starting out, it's just yeah.
That's also a very good practical tip to prevent. So let's go back to your diet in a little bit, but just as a practical tip, what I found really helps me to prevent snacking is to just have a liter of water next to you at all times and just sip it throughout the day. It's a beautiful little hack to prevent you from feeling empty or from feeling hungry or something like that. Just have a liter of water, sip it throughout the day, refill it when it's empty, but just have it with you at all times. That works for me. And on top of that, you stay very hydrated because not drinking enough is also a real thing. That's people generally have an issue with.
Yeah, and Jeff, how long have you been doing that as far as um being more disciplined and implementing just making sure that you're properly hydrated?
For as long as I can't give you a number, to be honest, years.
Okay. And you've been doing it for a while where you've actively try to make it a daily practice to stay hydrated. And how would you say that has affected I guess your body throughout the day compared to when you're not as hydrated?
Well, I don't know, to be honest. I never. So the hydration part started, I think, 2 3 years ago. Because I noticed I wasn't just drinking enough, and I noticed that in the evening, for example, I could walk to the fridge, to get some food or whatever. And it's not necessarily I didn't go for like unhealthy snacks with a lot of trans fats and those kind of things, but I just went to the fridge to get something out of it, either a protein pudding or yeah, whatever, a block of cheese, because I live in Netherlands and the Dutch love cheese, so I get a block of cheese. It's called belega, I believe you just call it Gouda cheese. It's very young cheese.
Gouda, oh yeah, that's tasty stuff.
Love it, yeah. Old Amsterdammer is also really good, but it's pretty salty. It's quite heavy. If you ever see Old Amsterdammer, you should definitely try it. It's a lot more yellow, but it's quite nice. But yeah, so two things. I noticed I didn't drink enough. The recommended intake, I believe, for men is around 2.5 liters, and I didn't even reach 1.5 liters. So that was just a very practical reason to drink more. And I wanted to prevent that snacking from happening, that feeling of hunger, of craving to come forward. So that made me really aware of it. And the way I fixed it for myself is I bought an app on my phone, and even to this day, so right now, right next to me, I have a liter of water. The moment that liter of water is empty, I will grab my phone, I will go to that app, and I will log 1,000 milliliters of water in it. So that forces me to stay engaged in it, and I do it automatically, but it's a very good way to not forget it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm sure it wasn't like that at the beginning, though, when you first started using the app, right? Eventually, you had to develop that habit, and then, well, the word itself is right there. It became a habit that you just implemented in your day to day.
So I'm the kind of guy that the moment I get an idea in my head of something that I want to do, I go for it straight away.
Hence
So
the
I
podcast.
Yeah, so I didn't have trouble making it a habit. I went pretty consistent from it to it from the very beginning. Hence the podcast, indeed. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That never has been an issue. So the moment I will stop is the moment that's a conscious decision to stop, not because I forget it or something like that.
Sounds like some good, healthy masculinity for sure.
I hope so. I hope so. But yeah, I think it's the same background as you have. I have a natural interest in. I'm a naturally curious person, and I like feeling healthy and acting healthy, and I don't like putting stuff that are poisonous in my body, pretty much. So, like I said, every now and then, if there's a birthday, and in Netherlands, if somebody has a birthday, it's not like your colleagues get you a cake; you bring your own cake.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I will bring a cake, I'll have a slice. That's perfectly fine. It's not like I'm saying no to everything, but generally speaking, those are the exceptions. It's not the norm.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know,
Hmm.
and and some might say that's self-evident as far as like as long as you do like 80/20, or whatever margin you want to call it, where
Hmm.
the if you're consuming the majority of the time throughout your day, good quality clean ingredients for your body, and then yeah, absolutely, you you're allowed, and anyone's allowed anything in life. Um, that but they also just have to be willing to take the consequences that come with it. And
Hmm.
when it comes to that with nutrition, well, you weigh out the pros and the cons, obviously, and well, just eat if you eat healthier most of the time, and yeah, cheat, eat the ice cream, do all that, and you don't have to be robotic about it. But me personally, well, I was traumatized into it, but that's obviously the story that we kind of already covered.
Hmm.
And it's I don't recommend that to anyone, but I tell you, it's definitely effective.
Yeah, sounds like it.
But good thing about it is, it's a good sign of how you've moved on from some traumas. You're able to laugh about it,
Hmm.
so that's definitely a good. But let's see,
What's your stance on alcohol?
alcohol.
Yeah.
Jeff, I haven't this year in September. It would be a whole year where I haven't drank a single drop.
Hmm.
Um, I personally not a fan, and it's a personal choice that I don't drink, and I understand it's a widely popular thing for people, and it's a social thing
Hmm.
because, well, alcohol it calms, and with the right dosage, high enough dosage, numbs your anxiety sensors once
Mm-hmm.
you're under the influence, and for most people anyways. And that's why you're kind of fearless when you do stupid things when you're under the influence and you're drunk, and you don't think about it. So my stance with alcohol is, like I said, personally, I don't want anything to do with it. I have never been an alcoholic, I would say, by any means, and not really a hard drinker when I was drinking. And there were moments where I drank heavy, and you know, and I didn't drink that often. So because, well, you know, what's the point, right? If you're gonna drink, then
Mm-hmm.
you want to get drunk. Typically, most people, but I would say it definitely does more harm than good, and especially as I understand more about it and what it does, because we talk going back to the brain health, Jeff, is like I said before, alcohol numbs your anxiety sensors, and people that have withdrawals is when you're having the hangover and you're craving it again, and it eventually develops into alcoholism. But um, what alcohol does for your anxiety sensors is it brings them to below baseline. And this is something Jordan Peterson talked about. And when I heard him talk about it, I was just like, that's really interesting. And I did some research on my own end as well. And I found it online that that's exactly what it does. So not only does it calms your anxiety, but it brings it to below baseline. And that's where addiction starts for alcohol, because you want to get over that withdrawal and that addiction. And like I said, that's where addiction starts. And I have enough sense about myself, I would say. I tend to be a very
Mm-hmm.
self-aware person, and if I know something's bad enough and can lead to something that's bad, I stay away from it.
And I think it's even worse than it just going below baseline, and that's where addiction happens. Because I believe, and correct me if what I'm saying is wrong, because you know more about this than I do, but I believe if your baseline is 1.0 and it goes to zero point 0.5, so you are half less anxious, as an example, the moment that effect of alcohol goes away, it's not like you're going back to 1.0. All of a sudden, you are at 1.5, I believe. So the
Yes.
anxiety is coming back, but this time it's stronger. And because it is stronger, once again, you're going for the alcohol because that numbs it down. And that ties into your getting addicted comment. I believe you don't go instantly back to baseline. That pretty much goes for most drugs, I believe.
Yeah. No, right. Like you said, it it goes to below baseline and
Mm-hmm.
it stays there for a little bit. And that's where the withdrawal symptoms come into play.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's below baseline, because it's like, oh my, your anxiety sensors are going, holy crap, like I can't handle this, like
Mm-hmm.
why am I feeling like this? And then part of your logic brain goes, oh wait, I know why, like when I was drinking I was feeling like this. and
Let's go
in it
for it again.
exactly
Mm-hmm.
right.
My last conscious drink was last year, I think September, and I didn't have any problem. So let's get that clear. I didn't have any problem. It was just a conscious decision because my training went up significantly, and training together with alcohol, those two just don't go together. So I made a call just to quit it completely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was one little mistake where I got the wrong drink in February, but aside from that, the less conscious one was last year, somewhere in October, I believe. I don't miss it at all. It's perfectly fine, and it's not like if I'm at an event and somebody's offering me something, I will say no. But it will need to be a good reason. Generally speaking, I'll try to go for something else. Even to the point, if I'm gonna go out drinking with some guys, I'm gonna be the guy with the bitter lemon or the tonic instead of the beer.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, yeah. I also heard from, I believe it was Andrew Huberman that said that alcohol. So maybe you can shed some light on this. I'm quite interested about that. the brain insulates itself with some kind of layer in order to protect toxins from coming in, which sounds quite logical, because if toxins go into your brain, you have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some kind of insulation layer in maybe physical, maybe not. I'm not even sure how that works, to be honest. But the point is that I believe Andrew Huberman say that alcohol is able to bypass that insulation layer and directly goes into the brain to cause havoc. Do you know? Do you know what he's referring to? Did you hear that story? Do you know the mechanism?
So I don't know mechanism, and I haven't heard the story, but I'm definitely curious to learn more about it because yes, there is a layer, a protective layer for your brain. And yeah, and well, for multiple reasons to keep things out and come in, and also the inside structure of your skull there on the inside, it has sharp bony ridges. So when
Mm-hmm.
people get hit in the head and whatnot, they damage the brain. They get
Mm-hmm.
brain disorders and stuff. And but that's a side comment.
Mm-hmm. What's your opinion on artificial sweeteners?
Not a fan. Short answer. Let's see. Um, a lot of it goes back to the whole artificial concept, right? And what you're putting into your body.
Mm-hmm.
It's 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 just not a good idea overall if one, you can't pronounce whatever it is that you're putting into your body, and two, just doing your own due diligence to see what the effects can be. I mean, I understand things could potentially be cheaper cost, financial wise, for artificial stuff and standard American diets and ultra processed foods and all that. But artificial sweeteners are just, same concepts with what all the hormones and additives do to your body. It agitates and in all sorts of areas, different organs, especially your brain. Your brain needs that nutrients that's raw and organic and natural, and not this
Mm-hmm.
artificial stuff. Because you mentioned the omega threes and how, before the conversation, how it affects your brain and whatnot. And
Yes.
I can touch a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's specifically DHA, that a DHA strand of omega-3 fatty acids that are very crucial for your brain, whether it's development or just overall well-being and health for it. And for a variety of reasons, neurotransmitters. You, there's been research more and more coming out, and you may or may not know, Jeff, about Andrew Huberman talking about neurotransmitters too in
Mm-hmm.
some of his podcasts. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, the two main ones that stand out are serotonin and dopamine, that obviously play a role in your mood regulation and your satiety and also your sleep. And on top of the neurotransmitters, it's back to the inflammation concept. Is it reduces the inflammation in your brain, which is uh the inflammation in the brain is it's a huge killer, and one of the it's definitely an important focal point there for things to improve upon if you've been under the influence of ultra processed foods or standard
Mm-hmm.
American diet.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, with depression and anxiety and other neurological disorders, it's where a lot of that, well, it's just a lot of when you don't have all those healthy eatings, especially, as you're a kid growing up, early in the conversation of what we were talking about, whether it's the environment that plays a factor, which it does, but it's also what you're taking into your body and what your body is developing and growing upon.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just stuff that you don't typically think about. And then when you do your research, yeah, it can scare you.
Yeah, this is what we discussed earlier as well when we were discussing that experience that I had, with other people that are my age. You can't blame them. There's like a McDonald's on every corner of the street. If you go to the main city where I live, like within a radius of 100 meters, there's like five McDonald's, in a Five Guys restaurant. It's like everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. But I fully 100% agree. Nutrition, and especially, getting good amount of fats inside your body, getting good amount of protein in your body, and carbs to some degree as well. Those three things of as high quality as possible. That is absolutely crucial. And your comment earlier when we were discussing the diet about whole foods and about going to farmer markets to get your fresh meat, to get your fresh fish, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, drinking water instead of sodas, just things like that. It is so, so super important. And if you then go a step further and you combine it with proper training, man, you're gonna be 60 years old, you're gonna be 70 years old, and you're gonna look like you're 40 pretty much.
Hell
It's
yeah.
it's bizarre. You can literally go outside and look at. I had this conversation a couple of days ago actually with another guest about this exact same thing. You can go outside and you can literally identify who took care of their body and their health and their diet and who didn't. It is day and night. It is crystal clear. Um, in the extremes, at least, it's not. Once again, it's not an absolute because nuances are always there. But generally speaking, yeah, it's crystal clear.
Oh, yeah, it is. And it's, and it's got to start somewhere though, right? It's got to start with, well, you wanting better for yourself, assuming, you're out there listening and, you're the type of person that, knows themselves better than anyone else and knows that there are
Hmm.
things that you could improve upon, such as that, then yeah, think about it. Do your research and, consider what we're talking about here. It's for the betterment of yourself and, your future generations. And you mentioned we were talking about vitamins too and getting out. Yeah, is something you mentioned. Yeah, getting outside and stuff too.
Hmm.
And you have vitamin D. Speaking of vitamins and stuff, that's a that's a vitamin that most Americans, I don't know for Europeans, Jeff, and you can maybe help me understand that too, but
Hmm.
I know at least definitely Americans, most of them are, I think around 90% or something around that
Deficient.
high margin. Right.
Hmm.
They're deficient. And it's insane the research of what you find when you look up what vitamin C deficiency can do.
Hmm.
Most Americans are fat, sad, and anxious. And omega 3s and vitamin D and vitamin C, but primarily the first two, omega 3s and vitamin D, I would say if you focus on getting those two up better in your daily intake, your mood is most likely going to be changing for the better. It's not
Hmm.
going to be as volatile as it may or may not be. And something about vitamin D is you can get outside and you can get that stuff straight from the sun. Now, you could talk about, long exposure to sun and whatnot, but I would say 20 to 25, I would say, yeah, 15 to 25 minutes of just letting your body soak up the sun, any chance to get the opportunity is
Hmm.
is great. And, you know, when you're a kid outside, on a nice, hot, warm, sunny day, or whenever it's nice out, like you're outside and you're in the sun and it's soaking up. And, I would like to think that part of the reason why, you're all happy and excited and almost thriving as a kid is because you're getting that exposure, you're getting the proper a good dosage of vitamin D.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same over here. I'm not sure if the number is 90%. I will have to look at that, and I also don't know if there's a difference between the vitamin D deficiency number within America versus Europe. But I do know that generally speaking, over here there's also a huge deficiency. My understanding went in a bit of a different direction, though. My understanding went that most people are vitamin D deficient, and that the only people that would get enough vitamin D just purely from the sun would be people that work outside the whole day, pretty much. So, that would have their shirt off while they're doing construction work, for example, for the whole day, being red as a lobster. Those, I believe, get enough from the sun in terms of vitamin D. But maybe it's 20 to 25 minutes a day. What you said, honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. But I do know that for the largest piece of the population, you would need supplementation in order to get proper amounts of vitamin D in your body. Hmm.
Yeah, and the whole, 15 to 25 minutes a day I was saying, I would say that's a good place to start, especially if
Right.
you're
Yeah. Okay.
if yeah, if you're not actively doing that and,
Hmm.
consciously aware that you're kind of doing that in your day to day.
Hmm.
It's like anything else. You got to start somewhere, and if you start getting yourself a little bit of exposure, and yeah, you just
Fair
you just
enough.
feel better. Yeah.
Some is better than nothing. Fair enough. So regarding supplementation, maybe that's an interesting one. Aside from regular food, what do you do in terms of supplementation?
So supplements, I go with Amen Clinics.
Hmm.
Rain MD is their brand, and they have very good, healthy, tested supplements, I would say.
Hmm.
And yeah, I would say I'm doing a multivitamin from them. I have omega-3 fish oils, and yeah, those are the big ones really. And I try to get my sodium intake too, because sodium is something that can be demonized as well, but it's oh it
Yeah, a lot.
oh yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
What do you know?
Well, in general, the general idea is if you put too much salt in your food, you're getting a salt overdose, and that's not healthy for you. That's the general thing that you hear. The same story is that fat, that for example, saturated fat is bad. These kind of wisdoms, quote unquote.
Yeah, the culture knowledge, if you will.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Well, yeah, and magnesium too is a huge one. That's a lot of people are deficient in too, and that magnesium's responsible for like 300 or more different kind of processes and yeah, processes for your body, whether it's assisting in information from cell to cells or brain activity or anything. It's huge.
Wasn't magnesium in green vegetables primarily?
Magnesium, yeah, yeah. You have it in green vegetables. You can get them in carrots too,
Hmm.
and a lot of your vegetables pretty much. And red meat. Red meat is well, Max Lagavere, he was talking about it with the person that instructs the nutrition course on Peterson Academy.
Introduction
He
to nutrition.
Yes, sir.
Hmm.
He talks about that and how I'm losing topic. ADD moment.
Magnesium.
Thank you. Yeah, magnesium's is something a lot of people are deficient in as well. And
Hmm.
and that's something I read with Dr. Drew Ramsey's book Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety as well. It really like it's a great book at the beginning part for really having a very simplified breakdown understanding of the nutrients and the vitamins, and it's crazy. But
Mm-hmm.
red meat, back to the point with Max with Introduction to Nutrition, is animal protein contains more nutrients per pound than any other protein source. And it's crazy to to think that when you have a lot of talks and different types of diets out there, like, vegan, vegetarian, and pescatarian. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here to attack or demonize anything like that. I'm here to basically bring light with, the truth and facts of well, what I discover and what I understand that can be the most beneficial for people. And I'm sure there's different disorders, conditions, diseases, and reasons why people need to be on certain diets. And I'm not
Hmm.
going to take away from that at all. But, you know, when Max talks about protein, specifically animal protein,
Hmm.
animal meat being the number one, source or the best source for getting like the most nutrient dense type of food that you can get.
Hmm.
It's crazy. And when you do your research and you look into that more, yeah, it just kind of reaffirms what I've been doing with the whole implementing the majority of my diet with meat.
And it also connects to what you said in the beginning of this conversation, when we were discussing what your body properly absorbs is what your body is made of. Because you made the point like a big part of your brain is fat, which is the exact reason why omega-3 fatty acids are needed for your brain. And the alternative that I gave also is that's the exact reason why you want protein, because that's
Because
what builds muscle, and muscle is made out of protein. So it connects to what you're saying right now, that it it sounds very logical, even if you put the argument aside that red meat contains a lot of nutrients per pound. Even if you put that aside for a second, the fact that red meat is made out of the same tissue, and the same stuff that you are made out of, means your body recognizes it and can absorb it better, and can put it into can convert it into the building blocks that are needed for you to grow and to be healthy, and to put it in your body properly.
hmm
Hmm.
absolutely. And yeah, you are what you eat. And that old saying.
Quite literally, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so multivitamin, vitamin D, sodium, magnesium, anything else?
Those are pretty much the main ones when it comes to supplements.
Hmm.
I try not to lean too heavy on them. I'm a firm believer that should be a supportive factor and not
Yes,
a reliance factor.
fully agreed.
Hmm.
I do use a little bit more, and I'm more on the experimentative side. So I like experimenting with things just to see what it does, and then deciding later what I will do with it.
You and me both.
Uh, yeah, I think it's a beautiful way. Just of course make sure in front how much you should take and what you should use it for. So not to do anything bad, but I love
Yeah,
experimenting.
like heroin.
Like heroin. Why not? Why not?
Yeah, I'll try anything twice.
No, in my case, I use fish oil the same as you. So it comes in soft gels, so I take two. So that's in my personal case, and I will just give you the list. I use 4,000 milligrams of fish oil,
Good.
of which 880 milligrams is DHA, which is what you mentioned. 1,320 milligrams of EPA. Also multivitamin, just to make sure that everything is topped out. Everything that might be missing. Everything is good. All the bars are full. That's pretty much the idea.
hmm
So that's what the multivitamin is for. I use electrolytes, but I use them very specifically. So if I train very hard, I'm the kind of guy that sweats very quickly and very intensely. So I lose a lot of my sodium, for example. And what happens is if I drink water, and like I said, I have this bottle of water with me at all times. So even if I'm training, I have a bottle of water with me. But if I just drink water, what happens is there's a chance of me getting cramps because I just sweat too quickly and I lose I guess my sodium then. Since I've started using electrolytes, so now when I'm working out, I put electrolytes in my water and I drink that. I haven't had that problem anymore. So that was to me a solution that I experimented with, and it worked. So I stuck with that.
Yeah, and you experimented with your body to the points we were talking about just a little bit earlier, and you
Hmm.
found what worked for you.
And it also, I believe, it also contains a lot of sodium. which is what I believe that's what you lose when you are sweating. So the more you sweat, the more sodium you lose, the more salt you need to eat or sodium you need to eat in order to replenish that. So it kind of also makes sense.
Oh, for sure. The whole thing with cramps too is sodium for sure, and also
Hmm.
potassium.
Oh yeah, it's in there as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
right on, man.
Hmm.
And you mentioned 4,000 for your omega threes, which is a great number. Is a
Fish oil,
great
yes.
number.
Hmm.
Yes. And typically what people want to shoot for is at least 3,000, at
Hmm.
least. So the fact that you're doing 4,000 is great, man.
Yeah, for us, the reason why we're taking fish oil, because you could, of course, make the argument like, hey, why are you taking that? Just eat your salmon and your tuna, and then you can also get it. And fine, fair. That's a good point. For me, there's a very practical reason. So what you said, it should be a supplementation. It should not be a replacement. But in our case, we don't eat fish, and I love fish myself. But my wife doesn't, and the fact that my wife doesn't automatically means I eat it way less. So that for me is a way to get our fatty omega 3 acids in, and for her completely because she doesn't eat fish, so she has to take it from somewhere else. Um, and there's a little bit in butter, I believe, but yeah, she has a how do you call it? A lactose intolerance, so that's also not an option. So then this becomes a necessity. You need this.
Right. And then you could go into maybe doing like substitutes for butter and whatnot,
Yes.
coconut oil, ghee, or whatever it is. But
Hmm.
um and it's great on, for your relationship too, that you're not trying to be solely selfish about it and you'd be like, well, whatever, I'm just gonna cook salmon anyways. So
Yeah, that would not be a good thing. Although sometimes we cook separately. There's always exceptions, but generally speaking, yeah, that wouldn't be the best idea, I suppose. Yeah, and a couple of standard things. I use some creatine every day, 5 grams. Protein when I need it, so just whey protein, mix it with some milk after a workout. Super simple. And the one I'm testing with, and I'm not sure what I think about it yet, but the one I'm testing with is glutamine. Apparently, it's an acid that is synthesized from protein and that your muscle uses to recover. Apparently, but so far I'm not really noticing anything from it, so I'm not really sure if this is one I will keep in the mix.
glutamine.
Glutamine, yeah, specifically glutamine L, so the letter L.
Okay,
Hmm.
so you're getting some BCAAs in there.
Those are 4 letters, very large on the front. So yes, I assume so.
No.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, no, it's great. BCAAs, branch chained amino acids.
Hmm.
I think for anybody who's taking exercise seriously, and you don't have to, but it's a it's something that can definitely help with muscle maintenance optimization. That's a good term for it. And it helps facilitate muscle protein synthesis. So, with your whey protein and then your BCAAs that you're including with that,
Hmm.
combined with all your other protein sources, it's really hitting home to assist with muscle growth and recovery as well.
There is a big warning I read about glutamine, though. That is at least good to mention right now. Once again, I'm not true, so Google this yourself if you want to know if you want to know more about this. But I've read that glutamine. How was it described? Um, Glutamine helps cells grow or multiply or something like that, which is generally, I suppose, a good thing, but not if you have cancer. So this is a pretty dark turn in the conversation. But if you are prone to having cancer, or if you have cancer, or if there's cancer running in the family, or something like that, be very careful because glutamine is pretty much food for cancer. So it helps it grow faster, for as far as I understood. So Google this yourself, but that's my understanding how far it goes now.
Okay, definitely something to when you hear something like that, you want to take it into consideration. So I
Hmm.
would I would second that. Definitely do your research on that and find out for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's so interesting. Jeez.
All right. Mm, I think I have one more question for you before we work towards the end. What do you
All
think?
right. Hit it home.
This was actually a question from the community. So, for people on a limited budget and who might struggle with getting fresh food on a consistent basis, what advice would you give them to still eat healthy?
Portion control. If it's truly outside of your control and you really don't have any other way, portion control. That it single step itself will help and your body will adjust eventually with the food craving similar to fasting that I mentioned before. But yeah, portion control, where what it says on the nutritionist label is that's a serving size. Now, typically we overindulge as Americans and we don't follow that. And yeah, start there.
And any specific products that people can look for that are, for example, cheap but still very healthy, like buy rice in bulk or buy potatoes in bulk, or maybe some other products that are easy to come by yet very nutritious and and healthy.
Yeah. So you can find organics at most grocery stores, and there's arguments on, them getting sprayed with pesticides and hormones anyways, so what's the point? But I would say you're still aiming in that direction, and it's still better than, you know, what could potentially be bad from, what you could potentially be dealing with currently, which is the ultra processed foods and everything. And the good thing to look for is on the stickers for the fruits and veggies is you want to look for the serial number on the little barcode scan that starts with the number 9. And if it starts with the number 9, it's comprised organically as an organic, or it's comprised as an organic product.
That's interesting. If the barcode starts with a 9, it means that the product is of a better quality and healthier and has less pesticides and those kind of things.
In theory, for the first part of that statement, it's organic and healthier overall, yes. Now, you can't
Hmm.
control if a supermarket or grocery store is going to spray on them from the little misters and whatnot. So,
Hmm.
but
Okay.
yes,
Hmm. Hmm. Fair enough. Yeah, and I guess if you have farmer markets in the neighborhood, and I'm not sure how easy that is over there, although I do, America is a very big farming country for as far as I know, so there must be, in some regions at least, a lot of those. Anyway, point is, if you have farmer markets, then that's a very good option to get very good food, and usually, at least in Europe, that's the case, for cheaper as well.
oh, I can imagine. And
Hmm.
I've been to Europe a few times with my I should well, let me rephrase that. I've been to Europe, a few places in Europe for roughly about a month in total, and courtesy of being part of the military,
Hmm.
is I traveled over there and I was at Budapest, Varpaloda, Romania, and I'm drawing a blank on the fourth. But yeah, those are in Hungary. There we go.
Okay, so primarily in the east.
I would say so, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah, it was an experience too. And culture shock for sure, just like anywhere else you go. And I'll tell you right now, and don't take offense to this because I don't take you as this type of person, but my my experience going to Europe was 50-50. People find out you're American, they loved it and they wanted to party with you, show you all the cool spots, pick your brain all about the country, or they wanted nothing to fucking do with you.
Yeah, I understand. I get that. Oh man, you should see the amount of Americans that are walking over here in Amsterdam, for example. They're all over the place. Especially during the summer, they're all over the place.
I believe it. What's
Yeah.
How does that? What's your take on that?
On what the view of Americans?
Oh yeah,
I don't really have a take on it. I, okay, so this is okay. I will try not to piss the American listeners off.
you hear that, guys?
Hey, test, test.
Hey, there he is.
Ah, there we go.
So the last thing I heard was, I don't want to piss the Americans off. And then I said, all right, you heard it here, guys.
And then I was gone.
Yep. And then it's like, oh snap, they got him. They were
Perfect timing.
listening.
Perfect timing. No, I don't know. It's nothing really that special. I think generally speaking, America's being seen as a very patriotic country, and personally, I love that. I love it that people love their homeland, and I think, for example, in Netherlands, we could use a little bit of that. Love for your flag, love for your country, love for your history, love for your people, love for your community. And wanting to be part of that community and wanting to help it grow, right? I think within my country specifically, we are too individualistic. That's my feeling with it. So the whole idea um, that the Americans, in this case, just people from the United States, are very nationalistic. That's an idea that I think lives here a lot. Um, and I think that's fine. So I guess if people take the opinion like, hey, America thinks they're number one, we don't want to have nothing to do with them. I don't know. It sounds very short sighted to me, but I guess that's where it comes from. To me personally, I speak with people from all over the world all the time, from Africa, from Asia,
I've
from the
noticed.
United States. I work for a European country, so I speak with people all over Europe all the time, every single day. Today I was in a meeting primarily with Italians for most of the time. So yeah, I don't know what I can say about this, to be honest. Um, what I can say though is that um, they're very happy always to go to Amsterdam. For some reason, Americans are really excited about Amsterdam.
It's a mystery to me too.
Every American, if you ask them, where Netherlands lies, they ask the question like, "Oh, that's the country where Amsterdam is in, right?" Yeah, that is correct. That's correct. So yeah, they're really excited about Amsterdam.
Yeah, well, it's a huge
Hmm.
world, you know what I mean? And I'm I'm all about learning about different cultures for sure. I've been on a few cruises and I've been to parts of Mexico, Jamaica, Haiti,
Mm.
and yeah, of course those are just, touristy kind of things and
Mm.
Budapest was as well, but it was rich in history too and learning a lot and with being in the military, you get you get the opportunity to get outside of your own country and you develop different perspectives if you're paying attention to that
Mm.
of what its life is like outside of, you know, America. And it's crazy because there are, second, third world countries that are just yeah, the quality of life over there is terrible. And people going utilizing the bathroom literally in the streets because they don't have access to,
Mm.
basic plumbing and electrical and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things that people typically take for granted on the day to day. So
Mm.
it's huge for
Mm.
perspective taking. And yeah, it gives you an opportunity to practice gratitude.
Yeah, it's very fun. Especially, I really like that you went to the east of Europe. There's some very very beautiful places over there. So, um, my wife is from Poland, so naturally I went there quite a bit. If you ever get the chance to go to Poland, it's absolutely beautiful. Especially the moment you go to cities like Krakow, in the south, in the southwest, if I'm not mistaken, of Poland. Man, that city, it's incredibly clean. It's bizarrely clean. People are very friendly, very very friendly. Polish people in general are very friendly, very hospitable people. The food is amazing. It's nothing. yeah, fancy is the wrong word, but it's not. It's for as far as my experience goes, it's nothing like fine dining or something, right? It's very potato based, very meat based, very soup based, stuff like that. But it's just very hearty. It's very it makes the soul happy pretty much. It's very very good food. It's very tasty.
Yeah, it's
And
like it's hearty, like you said, and like home style, and it gives
yeah, it's
that.
beautiful,
Okay,
man. If you ever get the chance, go to Krakow, man. The moment you step into the cathedral over there. I don't even know how old it is. It must be 1,000 years old or something like that. It's bizarre. It's really breathtaking to see that. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful country.
I'm gonna have to definitely put that on my list. And thank you for the suggestion. And who knows, with the we'll see what happens with the continuation of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And yeah, I might be getting a free ride over there anyways.
Pleasure talking to you. It was really, really fun.
Oh, I'm glad you think so, Jeff. It was my absolute pleasure. This is the first podcast I've ever been a part of, and I'm lucky to land it with you and a fellow like-minded individual with Peterson Academy.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story at the beginning, from when you were growing up in that house and your relationship with your family, and being so open also about the diagnosis, how you dealt with that, walking me through those ideas, and then also providing your insights on nutrition. It's really really fun to delve into this with you. So thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate that.
I'm glad you think so, and it's my pleasure. I'd be happy to come on again.
Amazing. Let's certainly do that, Mitchell. Great stuff.
Awesome, Jeff.
Thanks, man. Take care of yourself.
You too, brother. Take care.
And with that, Mitchell has left the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And for now, and as always, take care.